Not sure what Amazon Cimmerian is and how it relates to VR? Well, you'll know after this episode, so let's get to it. You are listening to the How to Create VR podcast, weekly conversations with VR professional creators, designers, and producers. Hello and welcome to another episode of the How to Create VR podcast, where I speak with professional creators, designers, developers, and producers who work on VR, AR, and MR projects. I'm Marcelo Lewin, a VR developer, evangelist, and the guy behind howtocreatevr.com. My guest today is Ben Moore, the lead product manager of Amazon Cimmerian. Today, we'll find out what Amazon Cimmerian is and how we can use it to create VR experiences. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Marcelo. Happy to be here.
I'm glad I got you guys to get on. I'm a big fan, and I wasn't told to say this, but I'm a big fan of Cimmerian. A friend of mine told me about it during one of the interviews I had with him, and I'm like, oh, I'll check it out, and started playing with it, and I was really, really impressed with it. And that's why I wanted to make sure to get you guys here so other people can go check it out.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. I mean, we're having a lot of fun with seeing what developers are starting to create in the tool, and it's been really exciting since we announced it last year. And so I'm excited to dive a little bit more deeply into it with you today.
Cool. Before we dive a little bit more deeply into it, why don't you just give us a little bit of your background?
Sure. So I have been at AWS for about 2.5 years. I originally came as support for our Internet of Things services, and my background specifically is in Internet of Things. So I've worked in startups prior to AWS and focused primarily on product management and product marketing around Internet of Things. So when I came to AWS, that was the first place that I started on my cloud journey, really. And then as other opportunities opened up, and Amazon Cimmerian being one of those, although at the time it was not Cimmerian, we started a new project and, excited to be a part of the team and have been one of the early pioneers for AWS in this space, and looking forward to continue to do the work that we're doing today.
For those that don't know what AWS is, which I know many people do, but some may not know, that's Amazon Web Services, right? Like S3 and all that.
Yes, that's correct. So we provide cloud computing services in a pay-as-you-go model on demand through the internet. So for instance, if you need to use compute resources or database resources or maybe some business intelligence resources, you can access those services, which are all managed services, through the internet and pay for what you use, basically.
Right. And hosting as well, files. I've been using S3 for a long time. And the reason this is important, AWS is important, is because of the tie-in, which we're going to get into, but the tie-in of Cimmerian with AWS, right? Which no other app that I know of, at least out there, does that.
Yeah, that's definitely correct. As part of what makes Cimmerian a very powerful tool is the ability to integrate AWS services into the AR, VR, or 3D applications that you're building. So this is an approach that we believe will give developers a lot of power in terms of being able to build those types of experiences.
Yeah, and we'll get a little bit more deeper into that. How did you get into VR itself? I mean, I know how you migrated into Cimmerian, but what was your first VR experience? Do you remember?
I think like a lot of people, my first VR experience was really Google Cardboard. I've always been deep into technology as a child. My father was a self-taught programmer, and I became a web developer myself and was self-taught. And so I'm always very interested in technology. But when Google Cardboard was released, it was a really easy way to get into VR. And I started playing around with some of the visualizations and things like that. And now for me as a VR user, I find the most fun pieces to engage in are the ones that I can do with my son, who's about 7 years old. And I really like to see just sort of the expression on his face as he's experiencing new things, whether it's swimming underwater or, doing lightsaber battles or something like that. So those are definitely my favorite experiences.
Can you name one that you personally love?
I have to say that my favorite experience, which again, going back to being a parent, is the first time my son was in VR. He was in a Discovery Channel 360 video experience, and he's swimming with the sharks, and he was lying on the couch and says, "Whoa, I can breathe underwater." And, even a concept that I had even thought about when I was experiencing that same thing just minutes before. And, that's the one that always sticks out to me in my mind when people ask me that question.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. I love when I put people that have never done VR, I put them in VR. And the first expression I normally get is, whoa, and it just makes you feel totally good about that because it's like, yeah, you get it now.
Yep, that's definitely true.
So give us an overview of Amazon Cimmerian.
Amazon Sumerian is a web-based IDE, so integrated development environment, a visual editor. We use a WebGL-based engine to render scenes in the canvas at edit time, but also once they're published and during the runtime. And it allows developers who are not necessarily experienced in 3D development a tool set to use languages that they're already familiar with, so specifically JavaScript, to start building 3D experiences. And it is a tool that helps them assemble and publish these experiences directly from a browser at this point. So with one click, you can publish the experience and it will generate a URL, and then someone will be able to go and look at that published scene and view it through a compatible head-mounted display.
So in essence, this is kind of like an IDE for WebVR, basically for all the related technologies of WebVR?
Sure, that's a good way to put it.
You said something currently, you mentioned currently in the browser. So that brings up the question for me is, are you guys looking to in the future to do a desktop application for like Windows and Mac and whatever that other OS?
That's not something that is on our roadmap today. We're very committed to focusing on WebVR. We saw some movement in the industry last year around this time that aligned with as we were working and developing Cimmerian for release at reInvent in 2017 last year. And reInvent is Amazon Web Services technical conference that we hold in the end of November, beginning of December every year in Las Vegas. And it's where all of our developers come together and start to learn about the technologies that we offer. And then they also hear about the new ones that come out for the next year. So we saw this trend that we were going to see things go towards standalone headsets and mobile first. And we felt that an investment in WebVR was one that was worth pursuing. And so our focus at this point is on WebVR. We support WebVR today, and we are looking at the WebXR specification that Mozilla and Google have been working on, and we are actively working to support that as well, so that people can not only take the APIs for hardware controllers and sound and things like that they want to bring into their VR experiences, but then also extend that to AR compatible devices and be able to run those through browsers as well. So our focus is predominantly on web at this point.
Are you guys part of that standards body as well for WebVR, considering Amazon being so big?
We're actively contributing with others towards the WebXR specification, and so we're working with Mozilla and Chrome and W3C and looking to help define what that's going to look like over the next little while.
So obviously there's Unity, there's Unreal. Those are more native engines, right? That you create native apps for Windows or Mac. When would a developer choose, let's say, doing a native app versus doing a web app? I mean, is there like a checklist of, you do this and then you should go web, or you do this and you should go native?
We haven't really specified it in determining whether you should go web or you should go native. I think that the biggest difference between the two is the scale that you're able to support. So obviously, game engines like that are really good at supporting massive multiplayer ecosystems, and they are very good at extremely high quality experiences. The web part of WebVR at this point is still very early. It's nascent technology at this point, and although it's progressing very quickly, there are definitely limitations. And so, for instance, the number of vertices that you can have in a 3D model that you can support in a WebGL engine is definitely less than what you could do, say, in a game engine that's used today. So our focus is not actually on, is there a difference of experience that you want to create, but more on, who are we enabling to create those experiences? And our focus is web and mobile developers. So predominantly, most developers around the world have experience in web and mobile languages, and they're able to program for those platforms. However, they may not have the experience in 3D development, or they're hobbyists, and so their experience is very limited. We're looking at a way of providing a tool that connects them to the services that they may already use, or they would like to use, and use familiar languages to them, and then make the 3D development experience easy and quick for them to get started. And so maybe they don't have the same number of dials and knobs to customize things, but we're looking at, how can we add sort of best practices to make that development easier. In addition to that, we want to enable those people who don't have any development experience. So let's say subject matter experts who see VR or AR as a very useful set of technologies to communicate their message, but they have a hard time creating those experiences themselves. And so that may be a limitation of skill set, it may be a limitation of time or monetary resources. And Cimmerian helps with a visual programming interface be able to unlock those types of technologies for those types of people.
And we're going to get into the visual programming interface that you're talking about. But one of the things that for me stood out about Cimmerian versus there are other IDEs that are on the web, but none of them can connect directly to AWS services, right? And for me, that stood out as a potential for doing lots of VR enterprise applications. So is that kind of part of your focus too? Because you guys, after all, are Amazon and Amazon Web Services, and that's really focused on the big enterprise, right?
We imagine that everybody is going to be using Amazon Cimmerian as a tool just because it's a quick and easy way to get started. But our primary focus in terms of customers is enterprise customers with web and mobile devs that want to start creating these experiences. And so we look at customers who are creating use cases where they want to pull existing information that they have in cloud services that they're already using into their applications, and how do we make it easy for them to do that? And there's a lot of heavy lifting that we can do on the AWS side as a managed service to make that easy for them and make it easier to create AR, VR, and 3D experiences.
Now, you mentioned scripting languages. So there are two things that you guys support. You support both the visual and then the actual scripting language. Can you touch upon both of those?
Sure. So Sumerian is a visual scripting interface. For those familiar with 3D development, it's pretty standard in the sets of tools that you have. There's a canvas for looking at the work that you're doing. There's an entities panel for seeing the objects that you've placed into your canvas. There's an asset library so that you can look through what you have and what you'd like to place into your scene. But then there's also a inspector panel, which basically holds components that allow you to define properties that are unique to the entities within your scene. So for instance, it may be texture meshes that you're adding to a particular object, or maybe you're adding rigid bodies or colliders. So very common 3D development actions within your scene that you're building. In addition to that, we provide tools like a timeline editor for time-based animations. So you could move an object from point A to point B. But in addition to that, we also provide what we call a state machine. And the state machine is a way to visually add behaviors or logic to the entities that you've placed within your scene. So what happens when you add the state machine to a particular scene is it'll open up something that's called a state graph. And it's a way that you can look at states by placing them onto this graph. You can name them, you can prioritize them in terms of where they start, and then you can add particular actions to them. So you can open up a menu and you can say, for instance, perhaps I want this object to rotate, and you can search through a library of animations and predefined actions that we've provided to make your object do that. And then finally, you can link those states together so you can have multiple actions that follow each other. So for instance, if I click on an object, the on-click event would be my initial state. And once I've clicked on it, I want that object to rotate by 90 degrees, and then it would do that. So it's a way of giving people who don't have scripting knowledge a way to start building interactions into their scenes. Now, granted, the level of sophistication of what you can build in that is good, and you can achieve a lot within the state machine itself. If you want to get into really fine-tune your behaviors within your scene. Amazon Cimmerian also offers a text editor where you can script directly in the text editor, and you can attach those scripts to entities within your scene. So if you're really familiar with JavaScript and you look at the scripting API for the engine in some of our documentation, you'll be able to get a lot more functionality out of the scene that you're building.
So State Machine would be comparable to like Blueprint in Unreal?
Yeah.
Right, so it's a visual representation. All right, for the scripting side of things, are you guys planning on adding any kind of like console so you can write to the console or more debugging tools?
The focus today has been getting Cimmerian into general availability, which for AWS, that means that it's production ready. And we made that announcement on May 15th. And now that we've done that, we are evaluating next steps in the roadmap and where we're going to go. But as of today, I don't have things that I can speak to specifically about a scripting console that people can use and things like that. But we're continuously releasing new features. AWS is known for a high speed of innovation and iteration. We love hearing from customers on how they're using the tools and getting their feedback so that we can make them better. And that's one of the key pieces of AWS is that feedback loop between the people that are using the services. And if there's a large group of people that are looking for that type of functionality, those are the types of things that we take seriously.
And they can submit some of those feature requests via like the Slack channel, which by the way, you guys are extremely responsive there. Your entire team is. Would that be the place to submit feature requests and bugs and things like that?
Yeah, so Slack is a great way to get a hold of us. So slack.cimmerian.world is how you get access to the Sumerian Slack channel. It is 100% dedicated to Amazon Cimmerian. It's a developer community that has been growing since we announced the service in preview in November of 2017. And there is a active community of people who are developing on Cimmerian who are willing to jump in and answer questions. In addition to that, the AWS engineers that work on the Cimmerian team are constantly monitoring it, and they will jump in and they'll answer questions, and it's a great way to get a hold of us. In addition to that, there is a channel that is dedicated to product feature requests. And so if something is not working or you'd like to see something that isn't there, it's a great place to just go and drop us a note. Someone will respond and we'll put it into the queue and evaluate it in terms of our roadmap.
So what kind of AWS services do you currently support, and what kind are you planning on supporting in the future?
Today, there are two types of integration with Amazon Cimmerian. First, there's what I call direct integration. So those are services that are built directly into the editor, and you can access them through components in the editor. And then there's what I call indirect integration with AWS services. And those are services that you access through their APIs, and you're able to bring information that you call from those services directly into Cimmerian. So an example of that might be, say I wanted to call some data from a database and place it into my scene. I would use the text editor to call that from, let's say, DynamoDB, another AWS service. It's a non-relational database service. And I would be able to pull that information directly into that scene itself. And the way that we do that is we have integrated the AWS SDK into the Cimmerian IDE, and you can define that in one of the components. And currently today we support the JavaScript SDK, and that's how you get access to those other services. And so customers who are already familiar with using AWS services are very familiar with that way of accessing information, and so they can pull that information in pretty easily. Now, back to the other side of your question, which is services that are integrated directly into the IDE. We decided to take an approach first on voice. And we think that voice is a natural medium for interacting with VR scenes, but also within AR, mostly because your hands are often occupied, right? You've got controllers in your hands if you're in VR, and the number of inputs that you have are limited due to button mapping, whereas in AR, specifically mobile AR, you're often holding a device in your hands. And so it may be a little bit awkward to actually start touching the screen when you're wanting to do something. So we focused on voice. We saw that there was an opportunity to use investments that AWS and Amazon had already made in voice AI. So we've connected Amazon Lex, which is a service that translates natural speech into text strings. And then we've also integrated Amazon Poly, which is the opposite of that service, where it translates text strings into natural speech. In using both of those services, what we've been able to do is create AI-driven digital characters. So you can interact with what we call a Sumerian host, and there are currently 3 Sumerian hosts that are available for free that you can place into your scenes, and they act as virtual concierge, essentially. So if you have information that you want to provide to an end user once you've published your scene, you can use the host to deliver that. And the hosts can interact through Lex, so you could ask them questions and you can create a conversation tree. So maybe you want to order some flowers for your mom on Mother's Day, or Father's Day is coming up here this weekend, so maybe you want to order a tie or something like that. So you can ask the host a question and then the host can respond to you. In the response, the hosts are very lifelike because the animations in their facial structure and in their body is actually driven by the text script that Poly is translating to speech. And within that text, there's a markup language. And that SSML, that speech markup language, allows us to drive gestures so that the host can convey emotion. And an example of that might be if I were to say the word one, I would hold up one finger. People typically don't just speak, they gesture to give an idea of conveying some sort of sentiment on whatever the topic is that they're speaking to. And so we've been able to create that with the gesture system. In addition to that, the phonemes of the speech that run through Poly, so those are the characters that talk about how the sounds should be pronounced when they're running through the service itself, those are driving the facial animations of the host. So the way that the lips move and the way that the cheekbones in the host move. So how that host speaks to you becomes very, very realistic. In addition to those two parts, the hosts have what we call additive animation. All of the layers of the host itself animate separately. And so, for instance, if the host were to turn its head, it would lead with its eyes before it turned its head so that that action becomes more realistic. So Sumerian hosts are a direct representation of how you can take Amazon Web Services and specifically these voice AI services and tie them directly into a scene.
Can you animate them yourselves on top of the built-in animations, or will you be able to in the future?
Not today. So the way that hosts are built today, the animations are included with Cimmerian. We've definitely gotten feedback from customers that they're interested in being able to animate hosts themselves. It's not something that we've made available or have a timeline in terms of when we would announce that being available. So it's something we've gotten feedback on and definitely evaluating.
Poly and Lex. Can you use it without a host? And I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a speakerphone on the desk. It rings, you press a button, it talks to you, right? Like through a speaker, and then you talk to it back. Can you use those services without the host?
Sure. You can use Amazon Lex and Amazon Poly without hosts within a scene. So if you wanted to have sort of a omniscient presence in your scene that was speaking to you and you could speak back to them, that would definitely work. So an example of that might be, say a real estate company wanted to create a guided experience of a home. Maybe they don't actually want to have a host within that home because they don't want to take up screen real estate with that digital character. Maybe it's just something that is sort of that omniscient presence that's narrating you through the scene and guiding you in what direction you want to go to. Or maybe you want to do something as simple as, place an Amazon Echo into a scene and use that Amazon Echo as an entity that on a, let's say, a on-click event, you can ask questions to and then it responds back to you. So using those services without the host is definitely something that's available.
Let's talk about projects. You guys support projects, which projects includes many scenes and assets and all that. So can you talk a little bit about that and how do scenes work?
Projects are essentially a collection of scenes. So you would be able to create a project and multiple scenes that you want to place into that. Scenes themselves, today there isn't a transition between scenes. That part is something that we recognize as being something that customers want to do, and hopefully we can speak to that at some point in the future. But today that's just not something that we support. So projects are a way of collecting your ideas in a single place, really. Scenes themselves are essentially independent entities. And when you work with a scene, that scene has a unique ID, and that's something that's abstracted away from the developer, really. So when you publish it, each scene has a unique URL. And what happens is that when you hit that publish button, we will generate a CloudFront URL. And CloudFront is a content delivery service that Amazon Web Services provides. And with that URL, anyone can access that scene from anywhere. And so the idea behind Cimmerian is that we work to be platform agnostic so that customers and end users who want to view these experiences don't have to worry about what devices they're viewing them on. They just go to a URL, and it eliminates that App Store experience that a lot of people have issues with in terms of having to go somewhere, download a specific application for a specific experience. Instead, we can alleviate that part of the experience and just go directly to the URL itself. And so the scene itself is tied to that specific URL.
I see. And then people can, for example, then submit that URL to like Supermedium, which is one of those browsers for VR, and they have like a store for web VR, basically, where people can start discovering. They could do that, right? They can just take that because it's just basically a URL now to a web VR page.
That's exactly correct. So we don't support app stores in any way, but if a customer wanted to take their URL and publish it in some way so that other users could get to it, that's definitely one way that they could do it.
So what HMDs does it currently support today?
So today we support Oculus Rift and Oculus Go. We support HTC Vive, HTC Vive Pro. We support Daydream, and we support the Lenovo Mirage Solo on the VR side. And then on the AR side, we support ARKit compatible devices and AR Core compatible devices. So mobile AR today.
One thing to clarify on the AR side, and I'm not very familiar with AR, I'm mostly focused on VR, but from my understanding is you still have to basically export this into the ARKit on the Mac OS side, right? And then work from there on the IDE on the Mac.
Right. So you'd have to use Xcode, to get in and actually build the application. And we provide a native application to help you get started there. We've created a universal template so you can build once. And this is a key theme across both VR and AR is that we want developers to build once instead of build for a specific platform. So there's a universal AR template where you can build your scene and then you can use that same scene for both ARKit and AR Core. We've also announced that we are working to support ARJS, and we support it in some fashion today. But Jerome Etienne, who is the author of the ARJS framework, which essentially allows mobile phones to access AR experiences from their browsers, he has joined the team. He's the principal engineer on the Sumerian team, and so he's continuing to work on that specific initiative. In addition to that, as I said, we're also actively supporting WebXR, which will bring AR support into browsers so that it's not just VR devices at this point. And so we see that there's a lot of potential in these areas, and that should eliminate the need for creating a native application, which of course you could still do, and there's no reason that you should have to abandon that, but anyone could access those experiences from their browser. An interesting example of this is I actually speak frequently on live streams for the AWS Twitch channel, and while we were at the London Summit, we actually provided a QR code that doubled as a marker for a marker-based AR experience on the Twitch stream, which opened a URL with anybody who was watching the Twitch stream. They would be able to view that QR code /marker through the camera on their mobile device, and it would open the URL for the Cimmerian scene, and then that QR code marker would also act as the anchor point for the 3D model that was being displayed. And in this particular case, it was a globe that showed all of the regions that Cimmerian was available in around the world. And they were able to see that experience just by placing that up on the screen. It's a really interesting way to show the power of a browser-based AR experience, because they didn't have to download anything. They just had to look at it with their camera.
Now, a question regarding scene, because you said you don't support the transitions between scenes currently today. So that means you've got to put a lot of stuff in one scene, and that can get a little bit bloated sometimes. So do you guys provide any kind of optimization tools that tells you, frames per second that you're going at, this is going to take a long time to load, that kind of stuff?
There are definitely basic optimization tools that will give you ideas like frames per second. And then there's also tools that will give you an idea of what the actual scene size is. But today, there aren't more in-depth optimization tools that are available, such as it's going to perform in this way on this platform, for instance, a mobile device, versus this way on a standalone VR headset, or this way on a tethered headset. It's definitely some feedback that we've taken and something that we're looking at. But today, we're expecting that developers are going to need to look at those tools and be able to tweak the models that they're working with. And so if they have highly complex models, or they have models that have extremely large textures associated with them, they're going to need to look at those tools and optimize for that specifically.
What browser do you need to create Cimmerian scenes? We already know about where it runs the final scene, but to create the Cimmerian scene, do you have recommended browsers?
So we support the latest version of Firefox and Chrome -1. Now, our recommendation is if you're developing on Cimmerian, you're probably going to be testing your VR scene in Cimmerian, so you should probably be developing on one of those browsers. Other browsers will allow you to edit in Cimmerian, but you may not see the full functionality, and that's dependent on which browser you're using. So today the recommendation is that you use the latest version of Firefox or Chrome, and that'll definitely get the best results.
What about creating VR in VR?
Great question. We don't have any plans of it today. It's something that we hear occasionally. I think it's an interesting concept to look towards, and there are a lot of interesting applications in it, especially around collaboration and things like that. Could you and I, Marcelo, get into the same scene and start building it out together? And what kind of unique things would we be able to build that way? So I think that there's a lot of practical application for that type of work, but it's not something that we're working towards today.
Right. Or even just placing objects and knowing the height instead of having to place them and then getting in and testing to see, oh yeah, this is good, or no, this is not good. Let's lower it some more.
That's definitely correct. And the other side of that too is maybe you are having some sort of meeting with stakeholders where they need to be in the space and they're all experts in the scene that you've created, and they can go in there and acts as a pre-visualization tool essentially, and they can make some minor changes. And so we definitely recognize that there's value in that type of functionality, but it's not something that we have planned today.
And I know you guys don't support this today, and I don't know if you can share this for the future, but any plans of supporting Mocap?
We definitely don't support Mocap today. That is definitely one of the things that we've had more experienced developers talk to us about, and can we support that? It's something that we're evaluating and looking at our roadmap and how we might be able to include something like that, but not something I can speak to today.
So what is the future of Cimmerian hold? Can you, maybe 5 years from now, where do you see Cimmerian? And I don't mean in specifically features, but where do you see it in the industry overall?
Well, I think that for us, we really have seen a little bit of a chicken and an egg problem with VR scene creation, right? It's either expensive or time intensive to create those experiences, or it's just really difficult. The barrier to entry is pretty high. And the people who are doing it are extremely interested in it. They're typically influencers in the industry. They're evangelists. But for those people, the mass market that is really going to see value in it outside of things such as gaming or marketing experiences, there needs to be a tool that allows them to create those types of experiences and makes it easy for their end users to really work with what they create. So in 5 years from now, I see immersive computing and scenes that are created in Cimmerian as becoming much more of a norm, and people being acclimated to the idea of using VR and AR in their daily lives, and that browsers will have caught up in terms of supporting this technology, and that the sophistication of what you can put into a scene from the perspective of 3D models, but also maybe what you can do with technologies like machine learning will have increased by magnitudes at that point, that what we'll be able to do will be totally fascinating. And I think that the most exciting part of all of this for me is not so much hedging on where I think the technology is going to go and what I think I'm going to see, but being a part of one of my favorite parts of Amazon, which is what tools can we build that enable creators to build things that we haven't thought of? And I'm extremely interested in seeing all of the new things that these developers have in their minds and now have a tool that enables them to pull those thoughts together and develop something and publish it. I'm extremely interested to see what those are, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that we haven't thought of. I think a lot of it's going to be really, really cool.
Are you guys going to be doing any events or competitions specifically around Cimmerian to stimulate that creativity?
I specifically will be at the Amazon Web Services Summit in New York City. The AWS Summits are places that help developers who aren't familiar with AWS services get started. They're free. It's a great way to come in and take a bunch of technical courses that can get you up to speed on services other than Cimmerian. But I will be talking about Cimmerian specifically. And then we'll be at some other events throughout the year. I believe there's going to be some representation at SIGGRAPH this year. And then there's always reInvent later in the year. And so we'll definitely be around. A great way to get a hold of us is always through the Slack channel. So again, that's slack.cimmerian.world. And then if you're in Seattle, which Seattle is a great location for VR development, there is a monthly meetup. There's actually one happening tomorrow night that AWS is hosting that is specific to Cimmerian. And so we hold those. If you're there, it's a great place to come and meet the team. I'm typically there giving an introduction, and then we'll have team members that are running through the demos that they might be working on. And occasionally we'll invite customers and they can speak to some of the things that they've been working on. And then finally, we also broadcast regularly on Twitch. And so we're really pushing on these virtual type events where we can interact with developers in real time, and we'll pick a topic and we'll start to discuss that topic. But if we get questions that move along a tangent within the chat, we're monitoring it live and we're interactive with the audience. And so we can start to change how those go. And that's a free flow sort of interaction. And you can see the schedule for those events on aws.amazon.com/Twitch. And there's more services than just Amazon Cimmerian, but you'll see our existing pre-recordings for the ones that we've done already. And then you'll see the upcoming series. I think there are about 3 left at this point before we start another set. So those are all good resources.
Yeah, they are. The Twitch channel is great. I don't get to watch it live because I got to go to work and stuff, but I do catch the on-demand and learn a lot from them. So pretty cool stuff. All right, Ben. Well, hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time for sharing all this great information.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Marcelo. Really appreciated talking to you.
Any other links you want to give away, or URLs or emails, whatever?
Again, the Slack channel is the best place to get a hold of us. That's slack.cimmerian.world. And then if you want more information about Cimmerian, going to aws.amazon.com/Cimmerian is a great place to find sort of introductory information on the service. There is a link for getting started, and there you'll find a link to the AWS documentation, but more importantly, you'll find a link to the Cimmerian tutorials. There's roughly 60 tutorials at this point that run through very simple things like an introduction to the editor itself and how to interact with the different tools within the editor, to discussing specific concepts in 3D development, to connecting AWS services to your scene. So it's a great place for beginner to advanced tutorials and where a lot of people go to get started.
Excellent. Well, Ben, thank you so much. And to the rest of you, I'm glad you were here with me. If you enjoyed this podcast, please remember remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and like us on iTunes or SoundCloud. For more episodes, check out howtocreatevr.com/iTunes or howtocreatevr.com/SoundCloud. If you are ever in the Southern California area, we have a monthly meetup with lots of great presentations. You can join or RSVP for our next meetup at howtocreatevr.com/meetup. Finally, if you are interested in learning more about how to create VR, AR, and MR experiences, please visit howtocreatevr.com. Until the next episode, I'm your host, Marcelo Lewin. Cheers, everyone.